If you've ever spent any significant amount of time squatting in the past, you've probably recognized that your squat technique looks a little different than the person next to you or than the person that you're watching on Instagram. You've also very likely wondered, why does my squat look so much different than theirs? Well, there are several factors that contribute to why your squat looks the way that it does and why their squat looks the way that it does. And I've separated those out into two major categories. Our first category is going to be modifiable factors. And these are factors that we have some capacity through time and through effort to change ourselves. I've only listed intrinsic factors on this list, or those that are within us, because I'm going to leave extrinsic factors such as bar positioning on your back and such as stance width for a later video. Our first intrinsic modifiable factor is going to be joint mobility, and that's going to refer to our ability to take our joints through their full range of motion. For the squat, the joints we're going to worry ourselves with are the ankles, the knees, and the hips. Our second factor is going to be muscle mobility. This is going to tie very directly in with joint mobility, but will refer more specifically to our ability to take our muscle tissue through its full cycle of stretching and contracting. If you've ever gone into the gym with tight calves, for example, you've probably recognized that your squat felt and looked a little different than it did if you didn't have tight calves. And this is because restrictions in the calf musculature are preventing you from expressing the full range of motion in your ankle joints. Muscle strength is going to refer to our ratio of strength between one muscle group and the next as it pertains to the squat. So for example, if you've ever watched somebody with really strong glutes and hamstrings squat, you likely recognize that they utilize much more of a hip hinge pattern when they move. And that's their body's way of trying to optimize the movement pattern, maximizing its relative strengths and minimizing its relative weaknesses. As a contrast, an Olympic-style weightlifter might squat with a much more upright torso as they come down and back up in the squat. And that's because they're utilizing strong quad musculature and de-emphasizing the hip hinge musculature of the posterior chain. Finally, motor control is our last modifiable factor that we have on the list here. And that's going to refer to more or less the practice component of the squat. When you first started squatting, you probably recognized that the movement was very thoughtful, very effortful, and very awkward. But as time progressed and as you got more and more repetitions of the movement under your belt, you likely felt that start to melt away and you developed a certain amount of comfort and automaticity with the squat. As you progress through your training, you are going to develop more and more motor control such that you do not have to be so mindful of the various parts of your body as you're performing the movement. Our non-modifiable factors listed to the right here are going to include things that are more or less dictated by our genetics and our anatomy. Leg length, referring specifically to the length of our femurs and to the length of our shins, and trunk length, referring to the distance from our hip hinge point to wherever the bar is placed on our backs, is going to have a significant impact on how the squat looks. So for example, if we have a really long femurs, that's going to require us to utilize a significantly greater amount of hip hinge to keep the bar in its appropriate path through the center of gravity between our feet. Similarly, if we have a very long torso, that's going to allow us to keep our torso more upright while still maintaining the bar in its appropriate path. However, if we have a short torso, that's going to require us to pitch ourselves quite a bit more forward in order to facilitate the various moving parts of the squat and to keep that bar path steadily between our feet. In future videos, we're going to dive a little bit more deeply into each of these factors and discuss at length why they impact your squat the way that they do, as well as discuss a couple of those other factors that we mentioned earlier in the video.